One. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the next intergenerational dialogue, where we're going to be joined by the exceptional Edda Hamar, interviewing one of the young activists that's here at the Festival of Ideas for Sustainable Development on the work of African youth realizing the SDGs. So welcome to the stage.
Does that one work? Good question. Okay. Yeah, what's the audience on? Do we have to sit or can
we can stand? Should we stand?
Let's
Let's stand.
stand. I'm worried I'm going to fall off the chair.
We're going to stand.
Okay, cool.
Cool. All right. I'm here with Namhla. And can you please tell us a little bit about the work that you do in sub-Saharan Africa?
Right. Well, thanks so much, Edda, for having me here. So my name is Namhla Mniki-Mangaliso, and I am a South African. I live in the most beautiful city in the world, which is Cape Town. And I work with African Monitor, which is an organization that works throughout the African continent to build citizen agency so that those who are at the bottom, those who are generally excluded, can actually engage with their governments, hold them accountable, but also shape policies and legislation that lead to better lives. So we've been working on the Sustainable Development Goals for the last 5 years. And some of the most exciting things I've done in the last 5 years is to engage with young Africans, both about what their aspirations are for the future, but also what it is they need to see changing in the structural environment to actually allow them to achieve those aspirations.
Yeah. And from the ground, what are these perspectives? What are youth in Africa? What are they saying? What do they want?
Right. So, I mean, it's quite exciting because I think young Africans are vibrant and hugely aspirational. We, at the moment, are seeing the greatest, highest levels of education that we have seen in history. And so we are seeing a lot of advancement in terms of what young Africans understand they can achieve, but at the same time, a lot of frustration around the constraints that exist in the political and economic environment that make it impossible for them to actually achieve those aspirations. So yesterday we were talking about inequality, and often everywhere I go, I hear this frustration over and over again, that economies don't respond to the needs of young people. And so both in terms of creating opportunities for young people to engage in mainstream economies. And so if you think about the kinds of blockages people face around what skills the market requires as opposed to the skills they actually have, if they want to start small income generating activities, there are barriers to accessing energy, technology, financing, even just broader infrastructure like roads and so on. And so you're sitting in this situation where you have very aspirational, very enthusiastic, very committed people without the environment that responds to those needs. And what we are losing as a result of that is generations and generations of the kinds of people that could literally fast track us into highly productive and highly advanced societies, but because the economic, social, and political environment doesn't enable that to happen. The other thing I think that's important that I often hear is around voice, around the ability of young people and women to actually engage in decisions that affect their lives. And so this idea that governments shouldn't have all the responsibility to make decisions about people's lives. There should be an ongoing conversation between governments and citizens, and that is the thing that will shape a better future. So what's exciting about the SDGs that we're talking about today is, in fact, the fact that it insists on a multi-stakeholder environment. It says, as humanity, we must be better at talking to each other. And so governments have to learn how to talk to citizens. Citizens have to learn how to talk to business so that we can, in fact, co-create the kind of world we want to see. Yeah.
Wonderful. You know, in your day-to-day work, what does gender equality look like, and what does the activities that your organization does on a day-to-day basis? Can you step us through a little bit about exactly what your work is?
Right. So gender equality, goal number 5, a critically important element of our work. Some things that are exciting within the African context, for instance, Rwanda being an example of one of those governments that has the highest representation of women in its leadership. Ethiopia right now has increased its education, its universities, I think four times over in the last 10 years. Wow. And the majority of people that have been attracted to those universities are people that are going to specialize in science and maths, mainly young women. Wow. And so there's exciting things happening in understanding the role of women in society, and particularly young women. But there's still barriers, and so there are cultural barriers. There are issues around the links between insecurity and vulnerability that young women face and conflict situations. In South Africa, quite interestingly, when we talk about peaceful societies, goal 16, and young women are talking about what brings insecurity into their own lives, it's not war. We are not a war-torn country, but we have schools that are riddled with gangsterism, as an example, and drugs. Or we have societies that have high crime rates, but the most problematic one being domestic violence. And so then in societies like that, when we're talking about peaceful societies, we have to say, what are those things that on a day-to-day basis affect young women and women broadly? And what do we need to do in the environment? I continuously be talking about structural systems. What do we need to do in the environment, both to create a safe environment for young women to flourish, but also an enabling environment for them so that it's not just about survival, but about thriving and about achieving their aspirations. Now, if we need any more convincing that focusing on women is important, some of the statistics that emerge out of South Africa, for instance, we know for a fact that grants, social security that is targeted at women actually helps society go much further, and so they are able to stretch those funds more than grants that go elsewhere. So they take their young children to school, etc., etc. Yeah. So I think that it goes beyond negotiation to say we have to focus on young women, but it's exciting that they are rising, they are powerful, they are exciting. Some of them are in the audience here. I mean, Grace is one of our youth champions, and she's currently studying. She's going to be one of Kenya's most powerful women just in the next few years, I think. And so it's exciting, the kinds of things that are happening, but at the same time, we have to be realistic about actually how do you change the structural systems so that they stop blocking women from doing what they need to do. Yeah.
And how are you finding the festival so far? What are your highlights? What are you looking forward to?
So, I mean, who comes to a play conference, right? I think all of us have been really curious to hear and see what is this thing going to feel like? What is it going to achieve? And I've really been excited, and there's a couple of reasons I'm excited. Partly is because there's so much variety. And I think I was just talking to someone from the UN right now, and they were saying everyone in this conference must have the opportunity to say something. And so you have all these multiple platforms where we can go to different formats and have real meaningful discussions. And the idea that you don't just focus on people who call themselves experts, but really at a conversation, I think that's important. But the second thing that excites me even more is that we said the SDGs were going to be a transformative agenda. And a transformative agenda doesn't happen unless you start doing things differently. And I think that we need to start doing everything differently, not for the sake of it, but because when you start doing things differently, you start thinking differently. When you start thinking differently, you open up the possibility of new solutions. And new solutions is what we need. So I think this is the kind of space that we can take into the future because it allows us the possibility to play and to mess around a little bit, but eventually to create the kind of connections we need to create and to create, or rather discover the kind of new ideas we need to discover. So I think it's going well. It's been 1 day and a half, but I think it's going well.
So far, so good.
Yeah, yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience? We have 2 minutes left.
Do you have a question? I'll ask a question. You talked about engaging young people in the accountability around the goals. We know that millions of young people were part of the creation of the goals through the My World campaign and voting on the issues that mattered most to them. How does that actually come to manifest itself right now with local government, with national government? The UN in New York, there's a lot of forums at which the goals are talked about, but what can young people do to hold their elected officials account and make sure their governments keep their promise to actually achieve the goals?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you so much. Two things. I think one is around citizen-driven data. And we are working very hard to create this understanding that it's great for statistical offices to collect data, and young people must learn how to engage with that data. But the real stories for people on the ground, and this is what we do in our countries, is that we go to young people and we listen to those stories, because it's those stories that inform us and educate us about what are the real lived experiences and what it is that we could do to solve the problems that we're facing. And so a combination of the quantitative elements, but the quality and make decisions, and we need to create the space for that.
Well, thank you very much, Namhla.
Fantastic, thank you.
And we have 0 minutes left, so
We've had 0 minutes for the last
perfect.
2 days.